Hi, I'm Tony Bowen and welcome to part 3 of my monthly build series. My part 1 that I did, I basically covered the history of the locomotive that I'm building. Part 2 was some shell modifications of taking out the dynamic brake housing fan, patching in some of the portal windows along the side of the EMD E-8 unit. But this month's was a lot of fun. This month was adding the jewelry, and when I say jewelry, I'm basically meaning the detail parts. And so with this locomotive, the biggest challenge was finding and locating the detail parts. A lot of them I already had on hand from previous locomotives I've done, but I'm also getting to a point that a lot of those distributors and manufacturers that were making locomotive and detail parts just aren't around anymore, or you can't find their parts, or when you do find their parts, you're paying a premium price for them that you're like, do I really want that part, or can I get by without it? And so as you watch this month's build, you're going to basically see a lot of the things I added, and some of them I had to get kind of creative because just because there's not the parts out there that there once was. So in some cases I'm using things like styrene strips to make a catwalk when I can't use the BLMA catwalks that they used to have in their EMD F unit and E unit dress-up kits. Some things for a backup light. I used to use things from J&J Trains in Ottumwa, Iowa from years ago. Any of those parts now are basically obsolete and hard to find. And so it was, how could I make a backup light out of just some common things I had laying around? And also, like my firecracker antenna, I'll give the tip that save your number 80 drill bits if you ever break them, because you can always start cutting those down and they make great firecracker antennas for locomotives. So I hope you enjoy the build and maybe pick up a few tips along the way. As always, if you have questions or comments, things you'd like to add, please post them down below. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have, or certainly pass along a tip of something you've done that might help me in my building process. So sit back and enjoy the build video.
All right. So I know it's hard to see because there's that illusion of a handrail already there, but that's what's been shaved off from the previous molded on one. But here you can see a little wiggle of the BLMA handrail that's in place. Now, I've not had much luck gluing these from the outside without it having a glob of glue in that. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll come back in, and where the holes are, I'll just kind of tip the car body down, kind of smear in that liquid glue so it kind of fills in that cavity where the hole is, but hopefully not seep out into the car body to hold that in place. The other nice thing is once it's primed again, once it's painted, that'll also help secure the handrails in place. So here's one in place. I still have one more to do on the cab door, 2 for the engine room, and then towards the end of the locomotive car body. So that's what I'll work on next. All right, a few detail parts have been added to the E unit. If we look at the front, we have the MU cap right there, and the wipers have been added. But now, as I work my way from kind of the nose along the side and then up on the roof, I've run into a dilemma. The catwalks that come with the BLMA kit, I am basically out of. I've used them for some previous locomotives, like this Rock Island number 49. Got a little catwalk there, and then a couple grabs along the nose. And then on one that I built just a couple years ago, the catwalk right there with the grabs on the nose. So what I'm finding is what comes in the kit for catwalks that are left are more like a large grab iron that would just have brackets. And so I'm feeling I'm going to have to fabricate something. So I'm thinking of just going with a small piece of stock styrene. And when I lay the shell down and cut the piece to the right length and then glue it on, that I can just kind of fabricate my own little catwalk on the fireman and engineer side of the locomotive. Because when I look at the prototype that I've got quick here, obviously the catwalk is there with a grab there and then one up on the nose, and the other side will just mirror image it. The wipers, as I said, I've already put in, and I've got the MU cap already there. So we'll see if using a piece of styrene, I would think that that should certainly represent the catwalk, because when you look at the surface area of when they're on another locomotive and when they're painted, essentially you just have a piece going out, and I don't understand why a piece of styrene can't represent the same thing. So we'll give it a try. Well, after taking a little break and coming back and using styrene for the catwalks and then putting on the grabs in the appropriate place on both the engineer and fireman side, I've come to find that the roof-mounted holes that had the factory Kato horn isn't necessarily where this one or the horn should go. So I'm going to kind of sand that off, fill that in with some model putty, and offset the horn more in a proper location, kind of above the engineer side of the locomotive. Otherwise, things are kind of shaping up on this kind of ugly beast right now. So as I've moved up the nose of the locomotive, I have installed the horn on the locomotive, and on the engineer side have the grabs above the cab. And we'll get ready here to mark the holes on the fireman side and also put in the grabs above the cab, above the window. And so I already have along the nose the catwalk and the two grabs there. So things are progressing and moving right along with the front of the locomotive so far. So the grabs on the roof on the fireman's side are now completed, and I've moved to the engineer's side and have the cab shade put on there. And so this little part here is the cab shade that will go on the fireman's side right above the window. And so then I think I'm going to have pretty much the nose of the locomotive complete. And so I can move to the roof line to put in the lift rings where I already have the holes pre-drilled. Now there are a few detail parts after it's been painted and that I'll add, like the cut levers, the MU hose, the train line and that. But as far as the parts that need to be on it before it goes to priming and painting again, they're pretty much complete. I do need to fabricate a firecracker antenna, and something that I have done that has worked out great is, if you're like me, you have probably broken your fair share of number 80 drill bits and things like that. Hang on to them. They make great firecracker antennas. Just take a little bit of that drill bit, glue it in place, and then if it's a little too high or that, just snip it off, and you may be able to even use part of what you cut off for an additional firecracker antenna. So I will need to add that. During this project though, my number 80 drill bit and my pin vise is pretty much hung in there with me. So no broken drill bits yet. So let's get the other cab shade on. Alright, so for the detail so far, we have the grabs on each side of the nose door, the MU cap, the grabs on the pilot, using styrene for the catwalk and then grabs along the nose, windshield wipers, the roof grab irons, part of a remnant of a broken drill bit for a firecracker antenna, lift rings on the panels of the roof, the steam generator. We've got the grab irons on the service doors, the cab door, and on the end. We rotate the locomotive. Catwalk on the other side. We've got the grabs on the roof. Firecracker antenna. We have the grabs for the cab door, the service door, and on the end. And we've got the lift rings on the other side of the panels. So what I have left is to fabricate a backup light, and then the MU hoses and cut lever on the front and back will be something that will be added later on, along with the train line and MU hoses on the front. So it's starting to really take shape. Alright, so I was going through my reference material, and in this case, one of them that I have used many times to fall back on is the Diesel Locomotive Encyclopedia, Volume 2. And when I'm looking at the normal position of the backup light on the E-8, it looks like the backup light on most cases was on the fireman's side up at the top. Now the problem I'm having is I do not have that detail part anymore. I used to have several cast resin ones that J&J Trains from Ottumwa, Iowa from long ago used to make, and I no longer have that. So I am going to try to fabricate one from one of my old model sprues, taking one of these guys, trying to drill a hole in it. That way I can put a lens in it, and then I'll cut it off the sprue, clean up the flashing and that, and hopefully that will represent my backup light for the E unit. So that's where I'm going to go next. Alright, so I was able to drill out and cut that sprue off one of the plastic scrap pieces I just kept in my model box, glued it on, and then just took a sanding stick and kind of filed it down, cleaned out kind of the little divot where the lens will go, and it's not going to be operating, so I think I'll probably just put one of those MV lenses and put in there, but I think that makes a good representation of where a backup light would go on the E unit. So just when you can't find the detail parts anymore like you used to be able to, sometimes you have to fabricate with what you can come up with. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed watching how I install a lot of the detail parts on the E-8. Next month the focus is going to be on decoder installation, how I put that in the locomotive, and also how I'm going to modify parts of the fuel tank underneath, because needless to say, some of the stock fuel tank that comes from the Cato that has some of the skirting on it, that's not going to be part of this locomotive model. So I'll show you how I cut off and trim off some of that. So I hope you will tune in for our next installment of my monthly build, which will come out in April. Until